Hi, it's Sunday, September 1st, Monday, September 2nd in the Philippines, and we have two systems to talk about in the tropics this week. We've got a tropical wave that is approaching the Lesser Antilles tonight, and will be moving through there in the next couple of days, and it may have a chance to develop as it moves to the Caribbean this week. But right now, nothing imminent so far with that system. We've also got Tropical Storm Yagi here in the Philippines. We're going to talk about this one in the latter half of the video, as we're going to briefly touch on the Atlantic first, but this system is going to be impacting the Philippines as we go throughout the next couple of days, and then the forecast has it hooking west into the South China Sea, where we could see potentially a significant storm there, based on current model projections. But I'll leave a timestamp to Yagi if you want to skip ahead of that part of the video, but like I said, we're going to briefly touch on the Atlantic system, as there's been a lot of talk online about this disturbance here that is now entering the Caribbean this evening, and there's been a lot of posts online of strong model runs, like the GFS model showing a big hurricane, say, next weekend coming towards the United States coast. And I want to take this as a moment to sort of set the scene of what we have right now with the system. The good news is, I'd say that those chances of, say, a big hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico next week are declining. One important thing with those model runs, and I will go to one of those model runs, I believe one of those big ones was yesterday evening. You see on this GFS model run that we have it intensifying into a pretty strong hurricane on the Gulf of Mexico, and this is by next weekend, early next week. One important thing that we've seen in these model runs is by the time it's entering the Caribbean, so basically now, how well developed is this tropical wave? And you can see on the GFS, on this run, which developed into a stronger hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, you can see it already had an area of low pressure developing on it. And this wave axis is much more amplified. You can see it better here, where it's much more tilted, I guess, south to north. It's more amplified in that way, and we have a greater concentration of vorticity or spin here on the central part of this wave axis. And this is a potentially developing tropical cyclone here on the model. Now, if we compare this to today's run, you can see that the trend has been to have this weaker coming into the Caribbean. And this has been an effect of this tropical wave being weaker than these models had anticipated today. You can see that if we look at the visible satellite imagery, we don't have anything well defined right now. We have a very broad wave axis, a lot of disorganized convection. We have a couple clusters of convection, but these are not really organizing in any fashion. And we don't really have any signs of a well-developed area of low pressure developing within this wave pocket. And this is important because a lot of the model runs, like I showed you on the GFS there, and the Canadian, which has been more consistent on showing, perhaps a hurricane in the Western Caribbean, a lot of those runs had the system being stronger now than it actually is. And because of that, we've seen a trend today, and I'll show you the Canadian on this. If we go to, say, the 12Z run from yesterday, you can see it's more amplified here, and it develops into a tropical storm, maybe a hurricane coming into Mexico. But yet today, it's now a weaker wave, maybe tropical depression in the Western Caribbean. And if we look at the model trends, you can see that this wave is getting weaker on the model analysis as a result of what we're seeing today. So the good news is today is that we're sort of getting some answers to the big question, what will this disturbance eventually do? And you can see the GFS is far from the runs over the past couple of days of showing a big hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. Rather, it shows it trying to develop once it gets into the Western Caribbean, and maybe we get a tropical storm into the Yucatan Peninsula or Belize on this forecast. Now, of course, we are still quite far out. You can see we're past 7 days by this point. Is it possible that something from this tries to make it north into the Gulf of Mexico? Yeah, it's a possibility. If we do see the system maybe try and get a little bit better organized in the Eastern Caribbean, it could become more of a possibility. But at least from what we're seeing today, it looks like the odds of something significant here in the Gulf of Mexico, like has been seen on several GFS runs, it seems that chance may be coming down now from whatever low chance it already was. And this is an important reminder to not pay attention to deterministic model runs, 300 hours out. I mean, those were showing a hurricane coming into the US next weekend, early next week. And this is an important reason of why you don't listen to a lot of those posts online that will try and fearmonger and say big hurricane on the way. A lot of times there's a lot of uncertainty, and especially in this scenario, we've had a lot more uncertainty just given the genesis of this disturbance. And that has made for a lot of sporadic model runs. Now, hopefully, because we're getting this system now detached from the intertropical convergence zone, we're getting it further west now, we can start to clear out the uncertainty. And I think we're starting to see that uncertainty begin to decrease today with what we're seeing with this disturbance. Now, having said that, there is still potential that the system does develop in the Western Caribbean. There are some still significant trades in the Central Caribbean, which are likely to keep the system at bay throughout the Eastern and Central Caribbean. But once it gets to the Western Caribbean, environmental conditions are likely to get better. And assuming the system just does not bury itself to the mountainous terrain of Central America, it could absolutely develop here in the Western Caribbean. And this could be a threat to Mexico or Belize, or in the most northern solutions, perhaps Cuba or the Cayman Islands. There's still a wide array of potential locations of where the system could impact. And of course, beyond then, you get into potential impacts further down the road, but it's way too early to talk about them in more specifics at this time. So the key messages today with this Atlantic disturbance is that we're not expecting, at least right now, a big hurricane to come through in the Atlantic in the next 7 days. It is possible that it does develop. You can see the Hurricane Center does still give this about a 40% chance of development. That seems about right. 30 to 40% is what model guidance is generally saying right now. And it's worth monitoring if you're in areas like Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, Cuba, Mexico, Belize, and Central America. As even if the system doesn't develop, we could still get quite a bit of heavy rain here. And of course, with mountainous terrain in these areas, you don't need a lot of rainfall to cause some flooding issues. So it's important to keep that in mind as the system does come through. And of course, if we do get into a scenario where something stronger does become more of a possibility, we'll make note of it in future videos. And I will have more videos on this as needed as the system does come further west. All right, so now we're going to move to the West Pacific as we have a more significant system here in the West Pacific. We've got Tropical Storm Yagi, which was named yesterday local time, and it's sitting right now just east of the Philippines. And the system right now seems to be struggling a bit in the face of some northerly shear. You can see as the sun rises that the convection looks to be more on the south side of the low-level center. If you look here primarily east of Luzon, you can see a pretty strong wrapping signature here with the low-level clouds on the northern side of this convection. And we actually see maybe some turning towards the south here if you look closest to Luzon. This is indicating that the system center is probably somewhere here close to the edge of the convection, likely an effect of this northerly shear that you can see impacting the system with all these convective bursts up here, getting their tops blown off towards the south. It becomes a little bit more apparent of what's causing this if we look at the water vapor imagery. You can see that we have that northerly flow here east of Luzon turning into more easterly flow west of Luzon, and the further north comes back in westerly flow south of Taiwan. So we have an area of high pressure here aloft right over Luzon, and this is on the eastern end. Our tropical storm is on the eastern end of this high, so it's bringing a little bit of northerly shear. And this is likely tilted the vortex a little bit. You can see in earlier microwave data that we had the mid-level center here. Now, it appears from this, at least from what I can tell, it is a bit hard to tell because of lower resolution on this one, but it does appear that by this time of this microwave pass, it wasn't too tilted. It does look like the low-level center and the mid-level center here were still stacked, but I'd imagine it's become a little bit less vertically stacked here, just given this pattern that we're seeing on visible imagery with the low-level center here, probably more of a mid-level center, maybe centered about here. And you can see this if we look at the H-Wharf analysis. This is showing the surface center in the contours, and the wind barbs is the mid-level flow. And you can see the mid-level center right about here on the model. So we have a little bit of a vertical tilt for the system. Now, in the short term, this goes well for the Philippines in terms of an intensifying storm. When you have a tilted vortex like this, the storm tends to struggle to intensify. What it needs to do is it needs to realign the vortex vertically, and then we can see a more efficient intensification process. Now, shear is forecast to subside. You can see that on the GFS. Now go to a closer view so you can see this a bit better, that the upper high that's currently shearing it is forecast to get a little bit more better aligned aloft with the system. You can see by the time it's here, this would be, looks like Tuesday local time. Now the upper high is more centered over our storm, and this would be a more favorable pattern shear-wise, and this would likely allow the system to intensify at a more efficient rate once it does, of course, get that vortex aligned vertically. But the difficulty is land interaction. If we look at where the system center is now, you can see it's not too far off from the coast of Luzon. And right now we're on a generally north or northwesterly track. And it's possible as well that we have the system getting tugged a little bit. Sometimes in these tilted structures, you can tend to get the system tugged a bit by the mid-level center, trying to realign the vortex. So even though we are perhaps looking at a scenario here where the system could avoid the entire coast of Luzon, in a scenario where this perhaps gets tugged maybe a bit further south and then continues that motion, we could see that center move right over Luzon. And if it does do that, that will likely disrupt the system a little bit, and we could have the system struggling to intensify really at all, even as the shear decreases until it moves off of the coast of Luzon. Now, this is good for the Philippines because this will likely, even with the shear relaxing, it will likely limit the system's intensification as it does move north. Now, even with that, we do have a large batch of thunderstorm activity here still with it, and this could easily lead to a lot of flooding issues as the system does traverse this area over the next day or two. Now, eventually the system is going to be bending back towards the west as we get high pressure development further north. You can see that here on the model. This upper high gets stronger over China, and this turns the system off towards the west. Now, there will be likely some time required for the system to, redevelop itself and get itself recuperated if it does, in fact, interact with Luzon quite significantly. But once that happens, the environment looks favorable for the system to intensify, perhaps to a significant degree. You can see the GFS does show this with potential rapid intensification taking place here as it moves west-northwest towards the coast of China. And just for some model consistency as well, and I'll go to the closer view of this as well, you can see the European model, another one of our very good global models, is also showing this scenario where the system gets into the South China Sea, recuperates a little bit from interaction with Luzon, and once that happens, we get rapid intensification on the model as it moves west or west-northwest towards the coastline of China. And this is a pretty well agreed upon idea by the global models, and I did not pick out the current JTWC forecast cone, but you can see in their forecast, they do show this as well, with the system not intensifying all too much over the next couple of days because it's interacting with Luzon and it still has some shear. But once it comes off the coast of Luzon, we get the system recuperating itself, and then we see a significant phase of intensification as the system comes west. This is certainly something to watch here if you're on the southern coast of China, say Hong Kong, further into Hainan, as the system is forecast to come your way, and this could be, potential significant storm if this forecast does pan out. And of course, I'm going to have more videos as we go throughout the week on this system, and I'll have, of course, more information as we go and learn more about the system as it does track west. But stay safe in the Philippines as the system comes through. That's all that I've got for today's video. I'll leave links to local weather offices that I can find at the top of the description. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.